Good morning, I'm Craig Christoffersen from Emmanuel Lighthouse Church. Welcome to your devotion. Is it springtime? I don't want to jinx it, but it's certainly a whole lot warmer and I'm enjoying that. Anyways, today we're going to talk about our memory. If you want to title this, we can call it Remember When. And now we have our obvious memory questions. For example, what did you have for lunch last Tuesday? Do you remember that? That's a pretty obvious memory question. Sometimes our memory is more tested when we're trying to find our wallet or our keys, and maybe we're in a different environment. We're at somebody else's house. Where did we put the keys? And we're checking all of our pockets. Where did it go? And we're blaming other people of who took the keys, who stole the keys. Well, I gave the keys to you. Well, I don't have them. You didn't give the keys to me. Oh, then it ends up, it was in your other jacket pocket where you never actually put your keys, but for some reason, this one time you actually put your keys there. Our memory is a faulty thing. Now, I read a book, maybe it was last year, I can't remember, but I read a book called Moonwalking with Einstein. And it's a book written by a world memory champion. His name is Joshua 4. I do remember that. And in it, he wrote about his experience. You see, he was a normal person like you and I, an everyday journalist. That was his profession. And he found out about something called the World Memory Championship. And so he went to the World Memory Championship, and in it, he saw some what might be identified as odd things going on, some odd behavior. There are people, just in dead silence memorizing decks and decks of cards. There are, people are almost wearing like these horse blinder kind of things to focus all of their intention on memorizing something. And this World Memorization Championship does exist. It is a real thing. And so it was interviewing some of the contestants, and they said, anyone can do this. We are not special. We are not, an above average person. We're just normal people. Anybody can do this. And so he actually took up the challenge. They said, anyone can do this. He's like, I can do this? No way. He didn't believe it. But he took up the challenge and he began to train in memory, in, these mental gymnastic exercises. And so in this book, he goes through some of the things and the techniques that they do. Some of it is just rote memory, but some things are memory techniques, such as something called a memory palace. And using this memory palace technique, I'm not going to get too much into it, but using this memory palace technique, in his book, he gave an example of this random kind of grocery list. In fact, using this memory palace technique that he showed in the book, I still remember that exact grocery list, that random grocery list from that book page, like a year and a half on now. And I remember it perfectly. But the memory palace technique is you use basically your own home. And he said, use your own home. Here's our grocery list. Our grocery list is pickled garlic, cottage cheese, peat smoked salmon, 3 bottles of water, 2 pairs of white dress socks, a hula hoop, and an ice making machine. That is the grocery list, the random grocery list that I still remember here a year and a half later, perfectly, without any problem. And so he said the memory palace technique is you picture yourself in your home, and you're gonna put each of these items in a very significant fashion, and you're gonna order them throughout your home. So he said, let's start in your driveway. And instead of your car sitting in your driveway, picture a massive bottle of pickled garlic in your driveway. And so I did that, and I pictured a massive jar of pickled garlic in my driveway. And then he moved on. He said, the next thing is cottage cheese. Well, we have to make it extravagant. We have to make it worth remembering. So on, your porch or your steps up to your door, picture a big kiddie pool, big inflatable kiddie pool full of cottage cheese. And you can even be swimming in the cottage cheese for that extra powerful memory. And so, you pictured that. And then he said, all right, we're going to go in, and next, probably you have a fireplace in your living room. So we're going to go to your living room, and on that fireplace, we're going to picture some salmon being cooked, and maybe to memorize, that it's Pete smoked salmon, we're gonna have a fisherman in our memory by the fire, and he's cooking the salmon. His name is Pete, and we're gonna make him memorable, Pete smoked salmon, by giving him, an orange rain jacket or something, very memorable and standout-ish. And so using these kind of visualization techniques within a familiar space, the power of memory is kind of unlocked, and I still to this day can remember that random grocery list perfectly. And in this World Memory Championship challenge, some of the challenges here are names and faces. So you will be shown just a random face and it has a name, and you have to remember the name that belongs to the face. And you go through all of that, and the record for the names and faces for 15-minute names and faces is 224 names or matched to their faces. If you make one mistake, you're done there. But 224 names and faces were matched and memorized in a 15-minute time period. Another challenge within this memory championship, World Memory Championship, is you have an hour to memorize they shuffle up these decks of cards, and they give you this whole bunch of cards, and they say, memorize this. You have 1 hour. You have to memorize every single card in order, Ace of Spades, Queen of Clubs, and all that kind of stuff, and you have to memorize it. The record for number of cards perfectly memorized in order in 1 hour is 2,530 cards. Memory can be extremely powerful, but yet it can also be extremely fleeting. We know that within the biblical context, the nation of Israel has a very hard time remembering what God has done for them. And they are given, if you look through Bible verses talking about memory, there are a ton of verses talking about remembering. Let's just go through a couple of them right now. Exodus 13:3, Moses said to the people, remember this day in which you went out of Egypt from the house of slavery. Remember this day when you guys are exiting the land. Numbers 15:39, it shall be a tassel for you to look at and remember all the commandments of the Lord. They were supposed to have tassels on their clothing, and they look down and they see that tassel and they remember the commandments of the Lord to do them. And so they are given a bunch more commandments to remember, but yet, Judges 8:34 says, thus the sons of Israel did not remember the Lord their God, who had delivered them from the hands of all their enemies on every side. So they did not remember. There are a ton of commandments to remember, but memory itself did not seem to be enough. For example, my great-grandmother is still living, and she, has been serving God her whole life, and I got the chance to set a camera in front of her and record her and ask her some questions about her life and what has happened. And her experiences with God are amazing, and they're powerful. And it's good for me to remember what God has done for her. But for me personally, it doesn't have that big of an impact, because that's what God did for her. That's not what God did for me. I'm happy about it and I'm excited about it, but that's just a memory for someone else. And God knew that when Israel took the promised land, this is the problem that they were going to have, is that the generations to come who were inheriting and born within the promised land would maybe remember what their ancestors had gone through. But because they weren't the ones who passed through the water, and they weren't the ones who saw the walls fall down, because they didn't do that, they would have maybe a remembrance of it because their parents told them, say, remember this and what God did for me, but it doesn't affect them. And so we read through Joshua, the book of Joshua, that they go in and they conquer the land. But as you remember that I spoke about a couple weeks ago, they conquered the land, but they didn't conquer all of it. And that's a frustrating experience. And so, why didn't they conquer all of it? Well, there's some different aspects that we went over. But if you read on to the next book within Judges, we are told that certain tribes are left in the land because God knew memory wouldn't be enough. Memory itself wouldn't be powerful enough to continue their faithfulness. They had to have personal experience. Memory can be powerful, but you also have to have personal experience. And so God left some tribes in the promised land so that the new generations that were born after, who didn't live through all of those things, who remembered it but didn't experience it, God left problems for them to kick out so that they could have personal experience with God themselves. And that later in life, they could remember personally those things that God has done for them. So memory is powerful, but as we see with the nation of Israel through the Old Testament, memory is powerful, but it's not enough. It also has to be tied in with personal experiences. So let's kind of wrap things up here today. Memory is powerful, and it's great, but it's also a little bit faulty. And it's not powerful enough sometimes to keep us in the future or even for future generations. So we have to tie memory with personal experience. Now, there is a ton of verses, again, about memory. Therefore, I will always be ready to remind you of these things, even though you already know them and have been established in the truth which is present with you. That's 2 Peter 1, verse 12. I got to remind you. So memory is powerful, but memory can be even more powerful to help us in our current and future circumstances. It's powerful when we tie in memory with experience. So let's do that today. Let's ask ourselves some questions. I kind of wanted to wrap this devotion up asking ourselves some questions, causing us to remember things that God has done for us. And hopefully that is going to help us to move on with our present and future experiences, knowing what God has done and what He is possible to do. Because there are future experiences that God wants to cause us to go through to continue to be faithful as a test of our faithfulness with Him. And our memory is going to be kind of a key component to walk faithfully in the future. So I want to end with these 5 questions. And so if you have a journal that you write in, pull out your journal now, go get a paper and a pen, or if you want to use the notes app on your phone, then go ahead and do that. And I'm going to put these questions up on the screen, and we're going to go through them. I'm going to give you time to write your answer to them. But let's remember together and kind of combine our memory with the experiences that we are experiencing now or will experience in the future, those difficult or hard times. So let's start off with our first question. What do you need God to do for you right now? What's the most recent thing God has done for you? What is the most significant thing God has done for you? Was there a time when God showed up and worked things out at the last second? And finally, did remembering what God has done shift your mood or your outlook on your current difficulties? Remembering what God has done is powerful. It renews in us a faith and a hope and also a joy. It is powerful to look back on what God has done for us and realize what we're going through right now, we're going to be okay. God has proven faithful in the past, and He will continue to prove faithful in the future. And so as a regular act, I encourage you to take time and remember what God has done for you. It is a powerful tool to both remind yourself of God's past faithfulness and to prove to yourself that you can be faithful in the future. Amen. God bless you, church. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day.